So welcome everyone. Nice to see some of your faces again. Just give it another couple of minutes.
I still can't figure out how to work Zoom.
Watching your hand with Dharmarati.
Just going to gather view so I can see people rather than see me.
Caroline, I've got a question.
Yeah, fire away.
Where do I find the symbol for putting my hand up?
It depends what device you're on.
Well, an iMac, of course. What else?
Naturally. I believe it would be in if you go to the chat box.
Right.
Actually, it might not be there.
It should be on the bottom of the bottom of the screen. It says reaction.
There you go. Proud to sort of sing the tech support.
No, it's not there. Participants?
Mine says under participants.
Participants.
So if you have a moment of inattention, the discussion's too boring, you can have a little wander around your software and find out where all the symbols are. So yesterday, we had a look at the feelings section, and at the end of that section, we did a kind of short reflection based on the Anapanasati structure for looking at that. And if you don't mind, I wanted to come back to it and that reflection. People were saying what a crucial point that separating out of objects of attention and the quality of our response to it. And I found this such a helpful bit of practice, and it's such a good lead-in to the section on the mind. I wouldn't mind just starting off and revisiting that practice. And the bit that's really kind of struck me at the minute, a little image that I found helpful, again, I quoted yesterday, that Analayo borrowing that image from the Karaniya Metta Sutta of a mother in relationship to her children. And I just thought it was such a lovely image for something that the practice is trying to get at, that we're usually so habitually caught in our own trains of thought and what we're attending to and the feelings that we're having. We don't easily separate out the awareness and the objects of attention. But one of the things that you're doing in this practice, and again, it's beautiful sort of unfolding, you get a real sense, I think, through this practice and through Anapanasati practice, that you're stepping into this stream of awareness, gradually spreading out through our experience. And starts off very simply, but there's this process of unfolding, like each stage sort of arises naturally, almost out of the stage before it. And what we've been doing in the first couple of areas of inquiry, being aware of the breath, aware of the body, aware of feelings, it's almost like you're getting this move away from our awareness mainly shaped by objects and starting to become aware of the quality of awareness itself. I guess that's what the whole thing about Satipatthana is getting at. And to me, this process of connecting to ourselves, connecting to the feelings, and then the Anapanasati approach, it kind of parallels Satipatthana. So I'm sorry if I'm confusing things by bringing in two different sources. But the Anapanasati approach deliberately gets us connecting to the sense of well-being that comes from that deepening connection to ourselves. So there's this little stage where it's saying connecting to joy, connecting to piti, and connecting to happiness or connecting to sukha. And it's this sense that we're gradually learning for the main sense of well-being, the main sense of our own stability, to be that quality of awareness itself. And then that awareness comes into relationship to whatever we're attending to. But so there's a kind of continuity of awareness. And Analayo brings in this image of the mother attending to her children and saying it's a bit like sort of the mental states that arise. We don't need to stop them. Meditation doesn't mean what one of the kids who visited the LBC once did a little drawing of the shrine at the LBC, a kid from a local school, and said that basically meditation means making the mind a plank with a P. So you're not necessarily trying to make the mind a plank, right? It's a quality of awareness that's independent of what it's attending to. So you get this idea that whatever arises, you've got this response to it that is attentive, it's even caring, it's even loving, but it doesn't have to get caught in it. The mum doesn't have to join in the children's games. And I think that image of a grown-up, if you like, but a kind of quality of awareness that's not having to not attend to the experience, but it's not shaped by it. It's not, well, again, using this language, conditioned by it. And also I like that Karaniya metta image because I think what we're doing in this, the quality of attention that we're bringing to our experience, it's as much love as it is awareness. It's not a cold clinical attention. It's something alive and responsive. So basically what we're doing in this sort of feeling stage is this image of something that's able to attend to experience without being caught in it and without being shaped in it. An openness, a clarity, a love that's almost intrinsic to the nature of awareness itself. And without getting too highfalutin about it, like that's quite easily accessible. You start to just connect to yourself. Out of that interest, the mind starts to settle a little bit. And that capacity, that sort of responsiveness of our awareness becomes more and more the central current, or at least a bit more central than it was. So let's just recap that reflection before we move on to the mind stage. So if you want to just make yourselves comfortable. Metta says engaged awareness, another nice evocative phrase. Again, just this idea that what we're involved in is an unfolding process, and the deeper stages grow quite naturally from, build quite naturally on the earlier stages. Just connecting back, aware of our body, quality of our posture, just mirroring, expressing the quality of our awareness. That sense of seclusion just for the next 10 minutes or so, just withdrawing from all the tugs on our attention. Just being clear with ourselves that we're going to be paying attention to the breath, to the body, to the awareness itself. just for a moment or two, it's bringing that quality of mindfulness into our experience, into our attention. What does it feel like when we're a bit clearer, a bit more connected to experience? Bringing that quality of attention to our body. And in that awareness of the body, aware of the next in-breath. What does it feel like in our body when we breathe in, breathe out? Broadening the awareness out to include the whole body. Sensitive to the whole body, I breathe in, I breathe out. Sense of the body revitalized on the in-breath. The sense of the body relaxing and softening on the out-breath. And just noticing any calming of the body that's happening as we take awareness in, as we let go of those habitual tensions. Calming the whole body, I breathe in, I breathe out. I'm bringing attention to the feeling tone of that. What does that feel like? In particular, just aware of those subtle feelings of pleasure, even of joy. Might be something as simple, as subtle Is the body relaxing a little? Might be the relief of feeling more deeply connected to ourselves. You're just looking for a sense of sukha. And sukha in the sense of the contentment that comes from a willingness just to be available to our experience, whatever it is, just as it is. Not holding on to anything, not pushing anything away. Just from that sense of connection to ourselves, from that sense of stability even, just start to be attentive to whatever's arising in experience, what the Sutta calls mental events. Sensitive to the activity of the mind, to what's shaping the mind. I breathe in, I breathe out. Sense of the mother in relationship to her children. We're attentive, connected, but we don't need to be caught in it. Aware of the activity of the mind without being active ourselves. Whenever you need to, recreating that stability by coming back to the breath, back to the body. Then if we're not feeding those habitual mental activities, we're not actively giving them energy, maybe just a sense of letting them calm down naturally on their own. The attention resting a bit more in the awareness itself. Calming mental activities, I breathe in, I breathe out. And just when you're ready, bringing your attention back into the room, back into the call. And I wanted to move on now to this mind section in the Satipatthana Sutta. And I don't know if you got a sense of this. I'm probably going to be doing quite a bit of talking this evening because there's a few kind of technical terms that I think are quite helpful in the text. But I was thinking that there's a sort of natural process that happens when you take awareness into experience like that. So you've got that habit of the mind being kind of merged with the objects of experience. And in this attention to the quality of our response, the awareness gets freed up a bit from the object that shapes it. I remember somebody using this lovely analogy once of that the mind tends to take the shape of what it attends to. They used this analogy of somebody grasping a cup and picking it up. And a lot of our experience is the hand around the cup. It's the mind taking the shape of the object that it's attending to. And it seems to me what we're doing here is that it's not that we're losing that connection with the object. And so if anything, we're even more attentive and alive to it. But at the same time, the mind's less shaped by it. It's coming from somewhere more still and somewhere more stable. And just sort of naturally, the awareness itself becomes a stronger current in the experience. So this transition from starting to be attentive to the quality of our response and starting to break the way we habitually get caught, for the awareness to become a kind of stronger current in the experience, you get this natural next step into awareness of the mind. So in a sense, that quality of awareness starts to become almost the strongest element, the most present element in our experience. And again, I don't even know quite how to sort of ask this, but do you get a sense of that? Like in that little practice, a bit more aware of the awareness itself and the sort of quality of the awareness? A couple of people nodding reassuringly on my screen, thank you. But so you've got that current starting to become a bit more present. And then the sutta itself moves to the mind. So it starts to say, okay, so what is it that's emerging here? What is it that we're attending to? So let's have a look at the text and what the text says. And the main section says, and how, monks, does one in regard to the mind abide contemplating the mind? So again, you've got this sense of not separated, but actually in it, the way we're in the breath, the way we're sort of feeling the texture, the direct experience of it. So here one knows a lustful mind to be lustful, a mind without lust to be without lust. One knows an angry mind to be angry, and a mind without anger to be without anger. And one knows a deluded mind to be deluded, and a mind without delusion to be without delusion. So that's a little group on itself. Then there's a second group. So one knows a contracted mind to be contracted, a distracted mind to be distracted. One knows a great mind to be great. So it'd be interesting in the discussion just to find out which of you knew your minds to be great in that little exercise. So you know a great mind to be great and a narrow mind to be narrow, a surpassable mind to be surpassable, and an unsurpassable mind to be unsurpassable. One knows a concentrated mind to be concentrated, and an unconcentrated mind to be unconcentrated. And one knows a liberated mind to be liberated, and an unliberated mind to be unliberated. So that's quite a lot to be attending to in your practice. But let's say something about each of these, if you don't mind. The first three, what's the kind of familiar territory? I hope, sort of lustful, angry, and deluded. Anybody recognize the grouping? You get it translated differently. Tara Prabha's got a look of recognition on her face. Tara Prabha?
Yeah, great hatred and delusion.
Great hatred and delusion.
Yeah.
So it's moha, dosa, and raga. The sort of ragas that was being translated as lustful. Doha, yeah, doha as the angry or aversive, the hatred, and moha as delusion. So it's those three root unskillful mental states, looking at the presence of them, looking at the absence of them. What I wouldn't mind doing when we're doing this is just sort of talking, first of all, just being clear about the map. What is it that's being described? And then after that, let's talk a bit about how to kind of work with it and how we sort of respond to these. But the first thing that we're being asked to do is just to recognize the presence or absence of each of these three. And it's the usual Pali idiom. So that the Pali idiom tends to talk about the positive in terms of the absence of the negative. So that the mind without craving, or the mind without anger, or the mind without delusion covers anything from the sort of the absence of active craving to sort of deep contentment, deep openness, anything from an absence of anger to a mind overflowing with love for ourselves and others. So that's the kind of spectrum that's being talked about. And I found it quite helpful when it's just sort of making a connection with a little grouping, I think, from the Mahamudra tradition that talks about openness, clarity, and sensitivity. And I think sort of openness, clarity, and sensitivity are just a way of stating the positive qualities. So craving, we tend to tighten up around an object of attention. And the absence of craving is an openness to whatever's arising. Aversions are pushing away of the painful. And the sort of sensitivity bit of that little triad is getting at the kind of aliveness, the connection to living, emerging experience. Basically, it's talking about love, or talking about compassion. And the clarity is just obviously the flip side of the delusion. So you're first of all just noticing the quality of mind. And it's almost like as you start, I mean, even maybe before going into that, there's just something about this letting go of the object, relaxing into an awareness of the mind. And basically the mind, I think in this sense, it's just that capacity to, it's that element of an experience that knows, that is aware of, is attentive to. So it's that aspect of experience. And there's something about, and back to that image of the hand holding the cup, when the hand stops holding the cup, it's almost like you're relaxing into something bigger. And so the craving is that tightness around the cup. The absence of the craving is opening up into something that more and more just has this sense of spaciousness, unboundedness, openness around it. Again, I don't want to overstate it. You know, it can be quite a kind of modest softening, but you get a sense of the direction of it. You get a sense of what the awareness is like when it's not so tightly bound. The clarity, again, you sort of see that, you go from we're not attentive to the breath at all to something that starts to be more and more alive to the unfolding flow, the unfolding process of what the breath is doing, what the body is doing, what the feelings are doing. And it's literally, or like for me at least, it's literally going from being dead to being alive. So this sense of connection to living experience. So there's that sort of process that we're starting to tune into that starts off quite modestly, but in those seeds you can see the possibilities of where the practice is sort of pointing to. So that the lustful mind, translating raga, and I like raga as a term. Raga means passionate attachment. So again, this sense of the mind tightening around the object of experience, and in that tightening, creating a boundary. A version, one of the Tibetan formulas is that we're protecting our sense of ourselves by excluding what threatens it. So it's drawing a boundary, drawing a division in our experience by pushing away, and then the confusion, we don't know what's going on. The mind protecting itself by stepping back into vagueness. So the first thing that we're being asked to do in this one is just starting to notice whether the mind is contracting through craving, whether it's moving towards openness, whether it's contracting through aversion, or whether it's moving into connection, whether it's contracting through confusion, or whether it's moving into clarity. So that's the first grouping. Second grouping is a little bit more technical. So again, I'm going to say a little bit about each of the terms. Before I do though, excuse me for going back and forward. Bhante's commentary on this is that the first thing that we're doing is looking at the quality of mental states. He's a bit of an activist, Bhante, and I tend to agree with this. He says that what you're doing, and this is the sampajanya element of the experience, we're distinguishing whether what's arising is supporting growth or blocking it, whether what's arising is supporting this unfolding process of liberation or blocking it. So there's an evaluation going on in what we're attending to. Then Bhante says discriminating between states of consciousness isn't an end in itself. The point of the practice is not just to notice mental states as they come and go, but to transform them. This ability to discriminate between mental states and then follow certain mental avenues in preference to others is what makes meditation possible. So there's something in first of all, the attending to, the just being alive to what's going on in the experience. But then there's sort of something in my experience that naturally follows from that. And it's a move towards the skillful. Analayo quotes a sutta, if I can find it. No, I won't be able to find it. I'll get it towards the end. But a lovely analogy where he said that the Buddha's talking about somebody who's rushing for no good reason, who suddenly realizes they're rushing. And in realizing you're rushing, you slow down. And then when you realize you're slowing down, you could even be sitting down. So then you sit down, and when you realize that you're sitting down, you think you might have a lie down instead. So there's something about just catching the disturbed quality of mind that I think almost spontaneously brings a volitional move towards the skillful. So there's the first step, which I think is the sati, of really starting to be alive to what's arising. And you're not in a hurry to change it. You're not in a hurry to fix it. but you start to feel that the tightening up of craving is painful. And the release of that into openness is such a deep relief that as we become alive to the flavour of those two alternatives, you move towards the skillful almost spontaneously. Anyway, I'll say a little bit more about that later. Second section is an interesting one. You've got the contracted mind and the distracted mind, great and narrow, surpassable, unsurpassable, concentrated, unconcentrated, liberated and unliberated. So all of those were being suggested that we attend to. The contracted and distracted, if you don't mind, I'm just going to tell you about this, but distracted is, the Pali is kita, and it means the mind in a rigid state and resisting experience, reluctant to move from the state that it's in. So you've got this sense of the mind moving away from awareness by digging into its current position. And then distracted is the opposite. You're not settling anywhere. The mind is just the traditional image of the monkey in the tree, jumping from branch to branch. So in this first one, you're looking at different ways that the mind stops itself from going deeper. You're just noticing if it's contracted or distracted. And once you start to notice that, and you start to relax those two habits, it moves on to the possibility of the mind going deeper. So that takes us to the next little pairing, which is one knows a great mind to be great and a narrow mind to be narrow. So narrow is kind of self-explanatory. It's interesting, all the way through this, you've got this sense of the mind boundaried and then the mind opening up, sort of narrow and great, contracted, distracted. All of them sort of suggest this boundary and then a sense of opening up. But great in this, it translates the Pali word mahagata. So mahagata is the mind become great. But great in the context of the suttas has a couple of technical associations. So according to the commentarial tradition and according to some of the sutta texts, mahagata really means that the mind's starting to open up into something deeper, and specifically opening up into the dhyana factors. So mahagata in this sense is the elements of dhyana starting to come. Some of you probably don't need this, but I wanted to say, like, I went for a lot of years as a practitioner with no experience of dhyana whatsoever and no clue about how to get there. And one of the things about this approach to practice that I've really found helpful is realizing that dhyana is just a kind of, if I may say so, a kind of an intensification and a clarification of elements of experience that are already there. It's just sort of, it's describing, you know, like this idea of initial and sustained attention. You're already doing that, you know, like as soon as you start to be able to stay with the breath for a few breaths, that capacity for initial and sustained attention is starting to be strengthened as a current in our experience. As soon as you start to feel that the arising of the joy, or even the arising of a wee bit of relief that comes from being a bit more connected to yourself, that's the first stirrings of piti. As soon as that connection and that pleasure starts to make us a bit more able to attend to experience, you know, just for a moment or two, you're kind of interested. That's the first seeds of sukha. So that the elements that are there, and then out of that connection, out of that emotional engagement, the interest in whatever's arising is the ekagata. You know, like that capacity to just be alive to, interested in whatever arises. And for me, sort of realizing that I'm waiting for this big bang, and all the time I'm kind of interested in the breath, I'm enjoying it, and I'm kind of attentive to whatever's arising. And those are the jhana factors. And again, this lovely little Majjhima Nikaya phrase that what you attend to becomes more real. So you start to notice those elements becoming a bit more present in our experience. You attend to them, and more they become the shaping elements of our experience. So what you're doing in the Mahagata is as the mind's a little less defined by the objects of sense objects and sense experience, you're becoming more aware of the quality of awareness itself. And some of the factors of that deepening experience is this capacity to attend to experience and take a deep pleasure in experience. So Mahagata is this developing tendency of those qualities of openness, clarity, connection, and so on. Second technical association with Mahagata, if you can handle all this Pali, is with the Brahma Viharas. And I want to come back to this thing about the Brahma Viharas. Sometimes, certainly when I was reading about Satipatthana Sutta and all this language of bare awareness, there's something very accurate in that, but it sounds a bit cold. And to me, this idea that the Mahagata traditionally is a description of the Brahma Viharas is as significant as the dhyana factors, that there's this quality of availability to pleasurable experience and appreciate it, and an availability to painful experience and respond not with aversion, but respond with love. So that there's a kind of a love intrinsic to this quality of experience. And out of that comes concentrated. And again, I'm sorry to be quoting Analayo so much, I'm sure you won't mind, but Analayo's got a lovely phrase for this. He talks about the concentrated mind not being a kind of fixation, but he says that the whole field of our experience held in an embrace of love. So what the concentration is, out of that opening up, out of that kind of aliveness to the emerging qualities of awareness, just this capacity for everything to be included in an embrace of love. So the concentration comes out of that wholeness and willingness to include whatever's arising. And then finally, liberated and unliberated. You're just noticing where the habits are drawing the boundary and where the mind starts to be free of the habits. And this idea of the mind liberated from those deep habits of confusion, of the pushing away, of the holding on, and starting to get a flavour of the mind when they're not the dominant elements of experience. So that, I think, sort of gives you a little bit of a sense of where the sutta is trying to point us. I haven't left much time for this, but I asked Vajradevi, I dropped her an email earlier. Vajradevi, if you don't know her, has written a book around Satipatthana Sutta, or Satipatthana practice, called Uncontrived Mindfulness. And I was having a quick read of some of her section on this, and I thought the way she talks about taking awareness into these habitual patterns of the mind of craving and aversion, what something more skillful looks like, was more articulate and more evocative than mine. I hope I'm not being too lazy by asking Vajradevi if she'd be willing to say something for a minute or two about how you might work with these qualities that are being described in the sutta. Vajradevi, over to you. Maybe Caroline could spotlight her. And although you can speak for a book's length of time, Vajradhari.
Yeah, I did say in my email to Dharmarati that the chapter in my book on craving and aversion is the longest chapter in the book. It's huge. It's a massive chapter. Yeah, because there is so much one could say. So yeah, I do find myself a little bit uncertain where to start. But I could just tell a story. Actually, I could just sort of say something of it's a story I often tell on retreat on working for myself, working with aversion, because the practice that I've been taught is one that's very much taken off the cushion. So the quality of awareness, the quality of mindfulness is there's this lovely word from the commentaries, karnika samadhi. So it's a momentary type of concentration, moments of awareness that add up to something that has a lot of flexibility and a lot of ability to recognize more clearly what's happening. And it works with the other factors of right mindfulness. So it works with wisdom, particularly the sampajanya quality of mind, clearly knowing what's happening. So yeah, just in a couple of minutes, very briefly. So there was I was in Burma, traveling with a friend, and we fell out. We didn't really know why. We just really, we tried to talk, and it went terribly wrong. And so we left it for a very uncomfortable 12-hour bus ride where we sat next to each other and didn't talk and didn't even touch each other. And then, we both went away and, I thought, I've been practicing staying with awareness. So I'm going to just put that into practice. I don't feel able to talk to her right now. It's not helpful. And so what I did is I just stayed with what was happening and tried to stay with it with awareness and some degree of what I'm calling right view or a Dhamma perspective. I love that phrase of Dharmarati's, or you quoted Dharmarati, that Dharmas as looking at the nature of things. So I was looking at the nature of aversion, and that's a lot of what we do in this practice. There's the nature of awareness, but there's also the nature of what's arising. So not the person, but the nature of the internal experience of craving or aversion. And that craving was like fire. Sorry, that aversion rather was like fire. It was huge. And certain thoughts would come in and they would really inflame feeling. And I'd feel it was like I'd thrown fuel on a fire in my mind. And I just watched that for a day and a half, actually. It took a long time watching. And the Dharma perspective aspect of it was recognizing this is aversion in the mind. This is anger, this is rage, this is whatever. These are thoughts arising in the mind. And sometimes I'd fall into the story, and other times I would feel like right view and awareness were working together quite nicely. And then after that had been sustained for a while, things started to calm down. It was more that, they started to calm down, but actually what started to happen was I started to have different types of thoughts. I started to have the sort of thoughts without trying to, that went something like, well, what if, I think when she said that, maybe she meant that. And that was a thought that I noticed had a calming effect on the mind. So it's like the mind was starting to, as the fuel ran out, it was starting to understand a bit more from a different perspective, from a bigger perspective, without having tried to make it so, but allowing that process just to be governed by the amount of awareness and the amount of right view in the mind at any moment. And the more that was sustained, the more could be seen of that scenario, more could be understood. And I really felt like I understood something about the nature of aversion in that in that whole process. And after the day and a half, I slipped a note under her door, and we talked, and that was pretty much the end of it, actually. So there's lots more I could say, but I know there's not very much time. But just to give you a flavor of working with craving and aversion as the object, as they arise, and being really curious about what is this experience like? What does craving feel like in the mind? What does aversion in its many, many manifestations feel like? And yeah, staying with that. Over to you, Dharmarati.
Lovely, Vajradevi. Thank you very much. And if you want to know more, there's the book, and Vajradevi does quite a bit of teaching. One of the things that made me want to kind of cue you in, I think I've come at the Satipatthana Sutta from kind of Anapanasati Sutta, so it's a kind of meditative approach. And one of the things I really appreciated about your book was that sense of the practice being carried on into moment-to-moment experience. And I sort of loved the way the embodied practice and the sitting practice kind of inform each other. My temptation, and I'm sorry that people haven't had a chance to get a word in edgewise, but my temptation is to spend the last 5 minutes just doing a little bit of that reflective practice and just touching, if we can, that flavour of awareness that Vajradevi describes as being possible to carry out into sitting practice. So thanks again for people's patience, and let's just do a little bit of attending to the quality of our own minds. And thanks very much, Vajradevi, for such a succinct evocation of how we can work with that. And just using this Anapanasati structure, starting very simply, tuning back into the breath. Breath connecting us to our body. Just on the out breath, allowing the body to release, relax. If we can include it without trying to rush it or trying to force it. Just aware of the feeling tone. What does it feel like to be a bit more alive, a bit more connected to our own experience? Out of that sense of connection to ourselves, just a relationship to what arises in our mind like a mother attending to her only child. Life to it, connected to it, but not caught in it. Just a sense of that quality of the awareness itself. Image of the blue sky, sense of openness, sense of spaciousness, clarity perhaps. Even looking for that sense of connection. The awareness, not something separate or detached, but deeply alive, deeply responsive to whatever arises. Perhaps just bringing that open awareness back to the breath. Looking for that sense of clarity. The breath be a little sharper, a little more focused. For that sense of connection, responsiveness, love even, for that unfolding experience. A sense of connection to the unfolding life. That quality of openness, present to the breath, but not clinging to it. Sense of space around it, sense of openness to whatever arises. And finally, just again, the Sutta talks about awareness of mind internally, awareness of mind externally. Just broadening that quality of openness and connection out Just having a sense of everyone else on this call. Openness that includes our own experience. Openness that's interested and curious about their experience. And just in your own time, finishing up or sitting on. Thanks to Vajradevi for describing that so evocatively. Thanks to the Sutta for giving us a little pointer about where our minds might go if we take awareness into it. And tomorrow we'll look at the final section of dhammas, of the nature of experience. So thank you very much, and I'll see most of you tomorrow, I hope.
Dharmarati, that was
Thanks.
great.
Thanks, Dharmarati and Vajradevi. That's great.